Some real demographic problems in our country. American families aren't having enough children.
I'm excited to announce today that Oklahoma is the first state to bring the Bible back to the classroom. It's very clear that the radical left has driven the Bible out of the classroom, which leads to a lack of understanding of American history. We will not stop until we've brought the Bible back to every classroom in the state.
So South Carolina just reintroduced their Prenatal Equal Protection Act, Bill 3537. This bill is going to punish women with taking their life away or keeping them in prison for life if they engage in any activity that results in them losing their pregnancy. This includes any physically demanding job, like bartending. It includes air travel, horseback riding, weightlifting, eating sushi. It includes riding a roller coaster.
Asian governments, and also the US government, seem to be concerned about the declining birth rate. Why does the government care if I have kids?
You guys have called, and I've come to answer. Honestly guys, I didn't expect my previous Handmaid's Tale video to blow up in the way that it did. As you can see, this is a pretty small channel. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for their very kind comments. I do read all of them, even the ones I wish I could erase from my memory. And I'd like to thank you for the encouragement, and I'd like to thank those of you that shared very personal, heartfelt stories about the subject matter. And I apologize in my previous video for the little audio mishaps. And I'd also like to apologize for some of the points that I didn't elaborate further in the video, because honestly, for my initial video, I filmed more than 2 hours of content, but I ended up cutting most of it to narrow it down to 35 minutes, because I genuinely thought that no one would want to listen to me yap about The Handmaid's Tale for that long. But it seems like you guys want the yapping to continue. All the better for me, since I'm obsessed about The Handmaid's Tale. I am one of those people you see at parties, up in people's business. Hey, did you know that the Nazis used to breed their super raced Aryan babies during the Lebensborn program? And they would kidnap people from Poland to increase Germany's population. So in this video, I plan to talk about more of the historical influences that inspired The Handmaid's Tale. Then I will delve into clearing up some misconceptions from the first video I made. Then I will talk about the reason why governments are urging people to have so many babies nowadays. And finally, I will wrap the video up by talking about some possible solutions we can implement together so that we don't see these horrible things happening over and over again, and hopefully ending on a more positive, optimistic note. So without further ado, here are some more historical examples that inspire The Handmaid's Tale. During her interview at the University of Toronto with Penguin about her research for The Handmaid's Tale, Atwood shares the news clippings she had gathered ahead of writing the book, with one titled Catholics Say Cult Taking Over. It's about a cult called People of Hope that subordinates its women, discourages social contact with non-members, arranges marriages, moves teenage disciples to households for indoctrination. The People of Hope was a small Christian community that was started in 1975 by a New York stockbroker and ordained Catholic priest named Robert Gallup. They called the women the handmaidens of God, but unlike the handmaids in Atwood's dystopia, these handmaidens were similar to the wives of Gilead. Their responsibility included setting a good example for other women and police one another to make sure they were following the rules of being subservient to their husbands. Justin Fahey, a former member of the People of Hope cult, who escaped later and wrote a memoir titled Community, Living in a Christian Cult and Dying to Get Out, says, "You would have the guys who were leaders, and then their wives who would be handmaids. They called them handmaidens. The role of the woman was to have babies, and they had to cook and clean. They were domestic, and they were not encouraged to go to college." In the same Penguin interview, Atwood recalls feeling unsettled by one paper's demanding of its readers, "Make a baby for Christmas," MP tells Canadians. A progressive conservative MP has suggested that Canadians start with renewed vigor over the holidays to increase the country's population, Atwood explained. Dave Nickerson based this proposal in the House of Commons on Statistic Canada figures that show Canada's fertility rate dropping to an all-time low. "It ought to be public policy to encourage families to have more children," said Nickerson, "in that the process involved is not unduly distasteful. Might I suggest that we could all start with renewed vigor this Christmas." Renewed what? You might have seen a character in The Handmaid's Tale show, going through an insanely painful procedure as a punishment for trying to escape Gilead. And like a lot of other plot points in The Handmaid's Tale, this procedure also has its roots in history. Female genital mutilation, FGM, also known as female circumcision, is a practice that involves the partial or total removal of external female genitalia, often including the clitoris, and is done for cultural, religious, or social reasons, usually with the intent of controlling female sexuality. It is a procedure that is supposed to make having sex for women extremely painful, while still ensuring they're fertile. Performing an FGM is justified with claims of preserving a woman's purity by reducing sexual pleasure to prevent promiscuity. FGM is primarily practiced in parts of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, with the highest prevalence found in countries such as Somalia, Sudan, and Egypt. Many of you might think, like all these other events that I mentioned, that this happened like years ago, that this is an outdated, archaic tradition, but I kid you not. I was talking to one of my friends who I've met during our practice of the deadly martial art known as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. For some reason, the topic came to FGM. I think because I watched another video about the historical incidences that inspired The Handmaid's Tale, and I was telling her, and she straight up told me, you know, my mother has done it, and I almost did it. My friend who's originally from Sudan told me that this is actually still a very common practice in Sudan. So as you guys might infer, this procedure is not something left of the distant past. It is still performed on many people to this day. FGM is internationally recognized as a human rights violation and is banned in many countries. The United Nations, World Health Organization, and UNICEF actively work to eliminate it. However, it persists due to deep-seated cultural beliefs, and in some regions, it is still secretly performed despite legal bans. And the sad truth about FGM is that this procedure is often carried out by older women in the family or community, midwives, traditional healers, or even female relatives. So these women, knowing fully well the pain of this procedure as it was done to them, will perform this procedure on other younger women within their families and their community. And similar to what I've discussed in my previous video, this tradition also highlights how patriarchal norms are often upheld by women as well as men. The red robes of the handmaids take inspiration from a number of places, including the 17th century garb of puritanical women and the habits of Catholic nuns. Religious clothing is usually forced upon women by authorities in other, more conservative communities. The Amish, for example, insist that women wear long dresses made of dark fabrics and head coverings every single day. And the FLDS Church, which is a very strict sect of Mormon, only allows women to wear loose-fitting and modest skirts, and they all wear their hair in the same type of ponytail. Similarly, after the Islamic Revolution in Iran on March 7, 1979. Just weeks after Ayatollah Khomeini returned to power, he announced that women should wear hijab in workplaces, saying, "Women should wear the veil in order to prevent corruption in society." In 1980, the government banned women from appearing on state TV without a hijab. In 1981, women could no longer work in government offices without wearing the hijab. In The Handmaid's Tale, not only are the dress codes meant to be controlling for women, it is also meant to be very visually distinctive, so they can very visually segregate people with the means of being able to understand everyone's rank, their social role, their worth, or lack thereof. The Marthas, household domestics, who are older, menopausal women, don identical green ensembles. The wives of the commanders always wear blue. The handmaids, meanwhile, wear heavy red dresses and white wings on the side of their heads, which is meant to partially cover their faces. Just as the handmaids are identified by the color of their clothes, the Jews were forced to wear a yellow band around their arm, which had a Star of David during Nazi Germany. This was used to separate the Jewish from those who were not Jewish, and served as a reminder to the Jews that they had no rights under German law. As I've mentioned in my previous video, people who are promiscuous, or just people who've acted in ways which is not in accordance with the rules and governing powers of Gilead, are sent to labor camps in toxic dumping grounds where they are tasked with cleaning up extremely radioactive toxic waste. And this is a direct reference to what happened to the prisoners of the Soviet Union during the 70s, who were forced to do manual labor in uranium mines to gather enough material for their arsenal of atomic bombs. As such, they were exposed to extremely high levels of radiation, and so the average lifespan of a prisoner in these mines was just 2 years. Serena Joy, the wife of the commander, before the Republic was formed, makes headlines with her powerful lectures and essays on the subject of a woman's place. She repeatedly argues that traditional gender roles should be upheld at all costs, and her dreams of holding traditional gender roles does become true at the end, although she, like so many others, is forced to pay for it with her freedom. While Margaret Atwood hasn't explicitly stated that Serena Joy is inspired by a real-life person. This article by Kaylee Dre on The Stylist argues that Serena Joy's character might be inspired by the real-life Phyllis Schlafly, who was a similarly paradoxically public advocate for domestic women.
We reject the anti-family goals of the Equal Rights Amendment. The American women do not want abortion, they do not want lesbian privileges, and they do not want universal child care in the hands of the government.
She began her political career as an anti-feminist in 1964 when she published her first pro-family book and led the charge against the Equal Rights Amendment, insisting that women should stop focusing on politics and instead tend to their families and their work inside the home. It wasn't long, however, before Schlafly's words, as Kaylee Dre has so eloquently put it, came back to bite her in the ass. In 1967, she ran for president of the National Federation of Republican Women. However, the critics argued that as a mother of 6 children, she couldn't fully devote herself to a political post. Eventually, after an ugly fight, Schlafly lost. In The Handmaid's Tale, Offred and her fellow handmaids are forced to bear children for the elite families of Gilead. Any healthy babies that are born are raised by the wives of the men who systematically sexually assault the handmaids. While this might seem extreme, similar practices of enforced surrogacy and adoption were implemented not long ago, with consequences still felt today. In Australia, as recently as the 1970s, Indigenous children were lawfully stolen from their homes and placed in religious institutions or fostered out to white families. From the end of World War II until the late 1970s, similar programs were carried out in the United States and Canada, where Native American children were systematically removed from their families to be assimilated into a more civilized Western culture. These programs are referred to as the adoption era in the United States and the residential school system in Canada. So, finally now, I will talk about some of the misconceptions from my previous video. A comment on my previous video stated that The Handmaid's Tale is actually inspired by how women are treated in Islamic countries, and that Margaret Atwood doesn't say that because she doesn't want to offend people. I mean, here, I'm not going to pretend like life is a utopia for women who live in countries like Afghanistan, but my brother in Christ, this is becoming a meme at this point. There is an actual Twitter thread where people are arguing with the author of this book, Margaret Atwood herself, that she actually took all her inspiration from Islamic countries. And while Margaret Atwood did state that she was partially inspired by the Islamic Revolution in Iran, which led to the establishment of a theocracy that significantly curtailed women's rights and imposed strict dress codes, she still took a major bulk of her inspiration and ideas from 17th century America.
What is the theory behind The Handmaid's Tale? Amongst the Aztecs and Mayans, when they wanted to build a new pyramid, they didn't tear down the old one. They just built another one on top of the one that was already there. And countries are the same. They construct their systems on systems that are already there. They change the names, the slogans, the flags, and the statues, but underneath it is the pyramid that was there to begin with. So what is the pyramid that was there to begin with in the United States? It was a 17th century Puritan theocracy, and that has come back, receded, come back, receded, come back, receded throughout American history.
And truly, guys, if Margaret Atwood didn't want to offend anyone, she wouldn't have published this book, especially in the 1980s. There were also a few comments in my previous video saying that the content of my video was about white feminism, since I'm white myself, while ignoring that one of my favorite authors and a person I quote aggressively from in the said video is Bell Hooks, one of the most famous, influential, intersectional feminist thinkers out there, who also happens to be a black woman. But I'll give you guys a secret. I, in actuality, am not white.
You need to leave!
Well, actually, I don't really know what I am, and let me explain. I am originally from Turkey, or Türkiye, as it is now internationally known. And in this country, although there are many different ethnic groups, such as Kurds, Tatars, Jews, and so on, we still don't have clear-cut race classifications, similar to the ones you would see while you're applying to a job in the United States or Canada. A lot of people from Turkey will introduce themselves as being a Turkish citizen first, before introducing their racial or ethnic background. This is not to say say that racism does not exist in Turkey. Racism is still there, but just in a different font, and it is usually very different from the imperial and colonialist approach to racism. When I first came to Canada in 2018, I've had people in the dorm I was staying in arguing with each other whether I was white or not. While my black friend argued that I was white, another white guy aggressively argued that I wasn't, since I'm from Turkey and hence classified as Middle Eastern, and I also don't have the highly coveted blue eyes and blonde locks. Okay, joking, he didn't say that last part. But I don't necessarily blame this white guy, since I've had to Google so many times what Turkish people classify as in terms of race within the United States or Canada while applying to jobs, as it is not always so clear-cut, and it weirdly changes from country to country and from person to person. Europeans usually consider Turkey too Middle Eastern to be considered European, and Middle Easterners consider Turkey to be too European to be considered Middle Eastern. So we're kind of just chilling there in the middle where nobody wants us. This is all to say, while I'm aware that I'm white passing and probably have reaped the benefits of white privilege, since I've been told that I look like the love child of Lily Collins and Timothée Chalamet and have a skin tone that would make an emaciated and dying vampire jealous, it is still kind of funny when I see people who don't know anything about me try to put me into these clear-cut racial groups, which are different depending on the person and the country, and use my presumed white as a way to project identities onto me. And for the people commenting and saying that I'm Jewish, I know why you think that way. Stop, guys, I'm not Jewish. Stop trying to guess people's ethnicities. But I will admit that for some time in my life, I was getting carried away with the white feminism train, mostly because I didn't even know the term existed until I read Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks, which discusses how a lot of first wave feminist movement figures not only ignored but completely removed black women and people of color from all discussions surrounding equality. Hooks highlights how white feminists often prioritize gender equality while ignoring the racial discrimination that black women endured. Black women were frequently marginalized within both the feminist movement and the civil rights movement. The historic legacy of slavery and its unique impact on black women, especially in terms of labor exploitation, sexual violence, and family separation, was overlooked by a lot of mainstream feminism. So I understand a lot of you guys' frustration while talking about feminism that a lot of these nuances usually aren't included in a lot of mainstream feminist discussions. But unlike what a lot of you initially assumed, black people and people of color are actually included in The Handmaid's Tale. While in The Handmaid's Tale show, they're handmaids of varying racial backgrounds. In the book, handmaids are purposefully depicted as white because the Republic of Gilead values white children and aims to maintain racial purity, similar to the thinking behind the Lebensborn movement in Nazi Germany, as I've discussed in my previous video. Gilead is a theocratic and patriarchal society that enforces strict social hierarchies, including that of racial segregation. So you are right to say that the book focuses on the experiences of white people, because that is on purpose. As for black people and other people of color, the novel mentions that they're classified as children of Ham and are forcibly relocated to places referred to as their homelands. This is a reference to the apartheid-style racial segregation, suggesting that non-white populations are removed from Gilead's main territories. This sort of segregation sounds awfully familiar with all this new talk about all these immigrant populations being removed from the United States, so I would say that this aspect of the novel is even more relevant now. In my previous video, I talked about how in times of economic instability, where people are in a state of desperation and anxiety, they're more willing to accept changes to legislations by power structures that promise the public that they will fix everything. And the examples I gave for these very influential and politically seductive figures were Hitler, Mao, and Lenin. And people had a problem that I included Lenin in this group, and I can see why, since Lenin's revolution actually had a number of benefits in the area of women's rights. In 1920, the Soviet Union became the first country in the world to legalize abortion on demand, citing public health concerns and women's rights. The decree was issued under Vladimir Lenin's Bolshevik government, making abortion free and available in state hospitals. The law was meant to protect women from unsafe illegal abortions and was in line with Soviet policies promoting gender equality. But even so, my purpose was not to state that all these three leaders are the same. I just want to point out that they're all very politically seductive figures that have completely transformed the way the government works, sometimes at the public's detriment. One of the reasons I decided to include Lenin with the likes of Hitler and Mao isn't because their regimes were similar, but because of their political seductiveness. I had recently read The Art of Seduction by Robert Greene, and in The Art of Seduction, there was a certain chapter that talked about Lenin. Robert Greene states that even though Lenin didn't look like a tall, burly, domineering man. His words and ideas held so much power that he almost entranced people. Being able to inspire people with words and ideas is a powerful skill, one that all politicians and world readers highly covet, and for good reason. Being able to entice and convince large masses of people to willingly be on board with the new social order is much more beneficial than forcing the public into the said new social order. But maybe for my video it would have been a better choice to include Stalin, as Stalin's USSR introduced policies to encourage early and frequent childbirth. Women who gave birth to 10 or more children received the Mother Heroine Award and financial incentives in 1944. While this was not a direct law forcing women to have children early, the government pushed a strong propaganda campaign for young women to start families as soon as possible and have as many children as possible, which is much more in line with the story of The Handmaid's Tale. So while I've shared all these historical events that inspire The Handmaid's Tale, I'm sorry to say there are still more things that can be shared about the historical influences. But again, I'm going to have to cut it off here because there are some other things I want to talk about. So while sharing all these historic events, some people have let me know in the comment section saying, well, isn't it our duty to keep procreating, to keep having babies? Isn't it our duty to keep making more children? Isn't that what we owe to our ancestors? I don't know about you guys, but my ancestors rode into battle with men, shot arrows at people from on top of moving horses, and they would roll in their graves if they saw the state of the world right now. And might I say, the word duty is being used a little liberally here. Aren't our universal duties in this world things like, I don't know, being kind to each other, helping our neighbors when in need, making sure that we don't leave trash after we use a public area? You know, things like that. In what world do we have a duty to breed? Everyone nowadays is talking about population collapse this, population collapse that. But I can assure you guys that for every American or Canadian couple that isn't having babies, there is an auntie in a remote Turkish village that is ready to bear an entire village, as if she's 3D printing babies like batch production. This is all to say that even if we see a global decline in population rates, it doesn't necessarily mean that humanity will go extinct. Not in the foreseeable future, at least. There are still plenty of people willing to have kids and are having kids. The world population has increased sevenfold over the course of 2 centuries. Organizations like our World Data and the United Nations predict that the global population will actually keep increasing toward the end of the century. The UN expects the global population to reach its peak around 10.4 billion. After this point, the UN demographers project global population growth to become negative, so that the world population starts to fall slowly. They also say that it is hard to make any prediction later than the year of 2100. An article from Our World Data by Max Roser and Hannah Ricci say that the population growth is still very fast. Every year, 134 million people are born. The United Nations Population Division reports that as of 2015 to 2020, Africa's total fertility rate was 4.4, indicating robust population growth in that region. So shortly, for the foreseeable future, there is absolutely no risk of humans going extinct. So why do all these politicians have their panties in a twist? Because the actual thing that is going to collapse isn't the population, but the economic systems that are dependent on the population. Speaking in a 2017 interview with the LA Times, Atwood explains, totalitarianism always has views on who shall be allowed to have babies and what shall be done with the babies. And this sentiment, unfortunately, seems to be more relevant than ever. Governments around the world poking their noses into people's breeding activities isn't a relatively new phenomenon, from how many children people should have with China and their one-child policy, how early they should have children with Decree 770 in 1966 under the Ceausescu regime, and the mandatorily early marriage campaigns in 1980s in post-revolution Iran, with the legal marriage age for girls being reduced to 9 years old, later increased to 13 in 2002. But let me ask you guys personally, doesn't it seem extremely invasive and a huge breach of privacy and personal rights for a government to be telling you when to have kids, how many kids you should have, and the acceptable gender of your baby? Isn't having children a private decision made by what I'm really hoping are 2 grown consenting adults who both consented to bring a child into the world? But I know, I must sound like an angry, bitter person who hates all kids, who's advocating for everyone to tie their tubes and to create a childless society like that one Love, Death, Robots episode. But again, this isn't what I want. It might surprise you since I'm pro-choice, meaning that I think everyone should be able to have a choice whether they want to have a baby or not. At the same time, I'm actually also very pro-life. But no, not pro-life in the way that red state conservatives have defined it, with the only life mattering being that of the unborn. I'm pro-life about all life. I love something that governments in affluent economies will never like. Non-working, non-tax-paying senior citizens. I even love those moths that get stuck into my bathtub from time to time. And when I don't notice them and start running the water before I shower, I start to cry as I notice them drowning on their way to the sinkhole, knowing that I am, even if unintentionally, a murderer. And I believe it can be a lovely and life-transforming experience to have children. I especially find that period in a child's development where they say or ask these out-of-pocket things, like, why do you look like an ugly Lily Collins? Why do sharks have feet? Why do you, as a fully functioning grown adult, believe in the imaginary value projected on a piece of paper with an old guy's pictures on it? Things like that. So my conservative friends' fears can be put to rest, as I am on your side. Well, partially. I love life. At the same time, though, do political leaders and figureheads encourage for the public to have more babies and bring these abortion laws because they truly care about life? Because they care so much about us that they want us to experience the beauty of child rearing and family values? Or are they motivated by something else? This appeal to traditionalism, as I've discussed in my previous video, is kind of like a smokescreen to convince the general public. If these political leaders actually cared about life, all life, and family values, wouldn't they encourage us to adopt the many at-risk youth and children at foster homes with no family or financial help? Wouldn't these leaders create a system for universal, free, or affordable healthcare so you don't necessarily have to be working to get treatment for your needs, especially as you're a senior citizen? Wouldn't these leaders protect wildlife from the increasingly industrialized world, rejecting construction or mineral extraction projects in areas where some animal and plant species are already in danger of going extinct? Political leaders seem to gloss over the issues I've mentioned because, in actuality, they don't really care about family values or traditionalism. They want, or more correctly, they need more babies because through time, these babies will turn either into taxpayers or into soldiers. The sad truth is that there are three main reasons why politicians push us to have more babies. Economic sustainability. Since, as I've mentioned in the previous video, the global GDP is more than ever, and to sustain the current economic system in a lot of affluent economies like that of the US, Germany, and Japan, with a growing economy, new people need to be born. And more new people need to be born every year constantly. Because if the ratio of working, tax-paying individuals to retired senior citizens is out of balance, this is a major threat to the economic system. Governments rely on income tax to fund social services like healthcare, pensions, and infrastructure. A smaller workforce means less tax revenue to sustain these systems. A McKinsey report highlights that falling birth rates in affluent economies like the US, Germany, and Japan necessitate significant productivity increases to maintain living standards. The average citizen will pay the price with overworking, likely until they're 80 years old or more. So in short, if you don't pop out babies like loyal soldiers, you ain't getting that pension when you're old. National security. A declining population can lead to a reduced pool of military-age individuals, potentially diminishing a nation's defense capabilities. Personally, as humanity, we don't really have the right to claim moral superiority on anything, or to talk about religious or biblical values, when we still solve every conflict by either killing or throwing bombs at each other. And in this mindset, of course countries like the United States, which derives most of its power from its military, is right to be concerned because, oh, what if we don't have enough young, capable men to shoot and kill and throw bombs at the other capable young men on the other side? As George Carlin eloquently puts it.
Conservatives want live babies so they can raise them to be dead soldiers.
It doesn't seem very pro-life to me when people only care about life before it's born, have all these laws and regulations to ensure that life is born, but after it's born, it doesn't matter if this person lives beneath the poverty line, if they can't afford healthcare when they're sick, or if they die fighting for the country. Cultural and demographic concerns. Hungary's government has implemented extensive family-friendly policies, including financial incentives to counter declining birth rates and preserve national identity. So sometimes having babies similar to the Lebensborn movement, is not only about increasing the population, but increasing the population with a certain ethnic group, the one you deem valuable to the nation's identity.
If we want Hungarian children instead of immigrants, and if the Hungarian economy can generate the necessary funding, then the only solution is to spend as much of the funds as possible on supporting families and raising children.
Although in the show people of color are also included as handmaids, in the book, handmaids that are supposed to give birth to the next generation are exclusively white, as the Republic of Gilead are trying to enlarge the number of people of what they deem racially valuable. How can we stop Gilead from coming to life? A few comments on my previous video expressed concerns saying that if I don't give solutions to all these horrible things happening in the world, how are people supposed to take anything away from it, other than being left with a sense of dread, knowing that an impending doom is approaching? And to that I say, I am a silly, goofy person that you've never met on the internet, and that you shouldn't ask or listen to me for any sort of life advice. Even so, my original footage for my original Handmaid's Tale video actually included some of the ways we can navigate out of this world, and the actionable steps we can take. But I eventually ended up cutting it out for the fear of sounding like a preachy know-it-all. And in these two videos, I've talked about issues that have spanned centuries, generations, and demographics. And it feels kind of sort of stressful to be put on the spot to come up with immediate solutions for these extremely big and complex problems that people have been dealing with for generations in the span of one YouTube video. Even so, I still hear arguments, and I still agree that more should be discussed about the actionable steps we can take to avoid a future like that of Gilead's. I do believe that fear and negativity by itself isn't necessarily going to inspire people to change our current systems. So I will do my best to discuss some things that we can collectively implement, some based on research and some based on my entirely subjective opinions, while not trying to sound too preachy. So before I get started with the solutions, I'd like to put a disclaimer and say that the solutions that I will mention will not be these like unheard of revolutionary things that no one has heard of before. Most of them will be very simple, subtle things that you've heard a million times. But maybe the way I discuss them will be able to change your mind about their importance. I think the best antidote to stop this polarization with the society is, and I say this with great fear, that everyone will collectively cringe, to develop love and empathy for one another. I told you I wouldn't be mentioning anything revolutionary, and I'm not trying to say, oh, everything will be solved with the power of love and friendship, but I'd still like to point out that these extreme historical events and atrocities committed are usually the result of a mass of people becoming so far removed from each other that they either completely ignore the suffering of a certain demographic or view the demographic as subhuman or not of any worth to feel anything for them at all. When we start talking about who should deserve rights and who shouldn't, that's when truly hits the fan. I think we need to remember that at the end of the day, beyond sex, gender, race, national borders, and religion, we are still human, and we have a lot more common in our humanity than our differences in these other categories. All of us smile when we're happy, cry when we are sad. We all crave love, comfort, security, and fulfillment. We are all born and we will all die someday, living lifespans that are inordinately short compared to the billions of years our planet and our universe have existed. So in this short period of time, while we're stuck occupying the same planet, the same nations, cities, and homes, the best we can do is try to learn and understand and respect each other, like two stones being rubbed together, shaping each other in the process until they finally click. I'm actually planning to make a separate video about reading fiction and the importance of reading fiction. Reading fiction is actually a great way not to only increase critical thinking, but also to cultivate more empathy. I personally feel sad when people just dismiss fiction and say that there is no value to be garnered from it because it's just fiction. It's simply not real. If you're a middle-aged man who's worked his whole life as a banker, you wouldn't know what it's like to be a 19-year-old trying to become a fashion designer. If you've been raised in a pretty well-off family with your every need cared for, you won't understand someone who's been born into poverty. But there is a way we can understand and feel closer to these demographics and these events and these situations. And one of the ways we can do that is through stories. According to this paper, often when someone reads a fictional story, identification with the characters in the story and emotional involvement in the story causes the reader to sympathize with the characters, and perhaps even experience the events in the story as if the reader experiences the events him or herself. Do you guys honestly think that our ancestors back in the day, when they gathered around the village bonfire, the village chief or shaman came forward and discussed how to earn money from 7 separate income streams? No, they told stories. They told stories about love, loss, friendship, grief, everything that people could understand and relate to together, because we're all human and we can all understand these conditions. With all that being said, I'm not implying that we need to respect views that don't align with ours, but we need to respect the people and the freedom of those people to have those views, as long as those views aren't violating a human right, that is. So let's consider an analogy. So let's say there are 2 different people trying to decide what to bake for dessert. Chad says apple pie is better, and Marcus says lemon cake is better. Now, Chad won't be able to convince Marcus if he starts yelling at him, saying, well, apple pie is better because our ancestors have always baked apple pies, so it is our duty to keep baking apple pies. There is no other way. This is the way things should be. If we don't bake enough apple pies, then we will have an apple pie shortage that will destroy the very fabric of the society we live in. You are morally inferior to think that anyone would be happy to eat lemon cake instead. Obviously, Marcus, who loves lemon cake, would take personal offense to that and retaliate, saying, all you apple pie lovers are the same. You never wanted to have lemon cake. Never even try it. That's why lemon cake is banned where you are from. Even if people wanted to have lemon cakes, they can't have lemon cake. Apple pie lovers are inherently fascists. So instead of this, maybe Chad and Marcus can take a more balanced approach. Chad can approach Marcus and say, you know, I've never really liked lemon cake. I've been raised all my life eating apple pies, and that's all I know. But I think you should try some as well. My mom baked the best apple pie there is, and that's why I'm so emotionally attached to it. Here, I'll make some for you to try. And to this, Marcus will be more open to share as well, saying, of course, same with me. I've always liked lemon cake, but actually I've never once tried apple pie. I'd like to try some, but I'd like you to try some of my lemon cake as well. I have a special recipe, and I'd like to know what you think about it. And with that, Chad and Marcus share slices of their respective desserts. Even if Chad might still not come to like lemon cake, or Marcus come to like apple pies, now Chad and Marcus have a middle ground, a mutual understanding and respect for each other's values and opinions, all because they were willing to try a slice from each other's cakes. All I'm trying to say with this analogy is that unfortunately we aren't gonna change anyone's minds by being super loud and abrasive. Trust me, I know from personal experience, me being as opinionated and annoying as I am, I have never been able to convince anyone on anything while shouting about it on the top of my lungs with historical facts and data. The thing the general public responds to is unfortunately not historical facts and data. It is emotions. And making someone feel heard and understood goes a long way. And here I'm not suggesting you play these Machiavellian games to pretend like you care about something that you don't. I'm just saying, generally just go talk to people, listen to them, to everyone, whether they are on your side of the political spectrum or not. Maybe if you listen to some of these people, you will find out that you have more commonalities than you initially thought. But still, at the end of the day, you still don't have to agree with anyone's opinions or their way of life, but you still have to respect that person, again, if it's not violating any sort of human rights, that is. One thing I've noticed, especially with my own and younger generations, is that the concept of a third place seems to be almost wholly eradicated. For those of you unfamiliar with the phrase, a third place, according to Ray Oldenburg, the American sociologist who coined the term, are places outside of the home, the first place, and the workplace, the second place, where people can go to converse with others and connect with their community. In this casual and social environment, no one is obligated to be there, and cause should not prevent people from attending. It is a place where people can interact with members of their community and even turn strangers into friends. It is a meeting ground to build relationships with others outside of home, school, or work. I don't want to be like a complete boomer saying this, but it does make me a little sad when I see people joke about not having any hobbies and rotting in bed scrolling on their phone after work or school. I know I might be coming from a place of extreme privilege to say things like, why don't you join the local sailing club? And have a cigar and have some martinis at the local Soho. What I'm suggesting is not that you join a fancy social club that has an insane entrance fee. What I'm suggesting is maybe something like a writing group, a pottery club, a run club. Just talking to and interacting with people that you see often at your local gym even goes a long way. Just small interactions can make us feel more connected, and this is truly important. Social media has allowed us to stay connected with friends, family members, and has opened doors for us to view complete strangers' lives on the internet for entertainment. It might be ironic for me to say this, because a lot of you guys are watching this from your phones, but social media is not so social anymore. According to several research papers, prolonged social media use can lead to mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and stress among adolescents and young adults. According to this study, in the United States, increased social media usage is linked to higher feelings of isolation. And according to this study, exposure to opposing views on social media can increase political polarization. Me showing all of these papers is essentially to say, we can't be having these long, heated, paragraph-long arguments with people we don't know on comment sections, guys. I've done it. I've tried. I went in so balls deep in one Instagram comment section with a guy that we eventually ended up switching to each other's DMs to continue the argument. At the end of a very prolonged and heated argument, neither my opinion nor his opinion was changed. We were both emotionally drained and exhausted, so this was a waste of time to say the least. Also, these doom scrolls, while fun in short bursts, if I doom scroll for 2-3 hours straight, I can literally feel my brain cells dying. And the more we interact with a certain type of content, the more the algorithm shows us similar type of content. It does not matter if our interaction was negative. Everyone has fallen victim to this at some point. Rage bait is a real thing. A lot of people can intentionally post content relaying extremely divisive opinions that they don't even necessarily believe in, because they know it will elicit an extreme emotional response that will translate into clicks, views, and essentially monetization. So while I don't condemn all social media usage, I will encourage everyone to use it wisely, knowing that there is a reason why platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok are free, because we are essentially the product, and we are paying these platforms with our time, our information, and our emotions. As you guys might have noticed, the solutions that I've shared so far aren't going to protests, posting things online, getting our tubes tied, or moving to a new country, which are certainly things we can still keep doing. But I believe that some of these actions would only be in response to suppressing symptoms and not addressing the actual root cause of the problem. I personally think that the kind of change that is going to bring back together a highly polarized society isn't going to be with even more conflict. That is just me and my personal opinion. So, to sum up the solutions, here is some homework. Read The Handmaid's Tale, 1984, Brave New World, or any kind of dystopian novel that piques your interest. After you read them, sit down and think about them for a moment. Think about why they're still discussed today. Think about why some of them might be banned in some places. Think about why some of these books might be really triggering. Read All About Love and The Will to Change by Bell Hooks. I mean, at this point, it is needless to say that I'm obsessed with Bell Hooks. All About Love discusses a lot of important points about how to connect, how to form communities, and how to even treat our romantic partners. I sincerely believe that if everyone read this book and took its messaging to heart, that we would have a more functional society and have more love and empathy. The Will to Change is another book that I quoted in my previous video. Although this book is more targeted towards men, I think it is all the more reason women should read it as well. It personally changed a lot of perspectives I had about men and about how men perceive the world and the current systems that we have. Read any fiction book. I don't care if you read Court of Smutty Fairies or something you deem more intellectual than that. I don't care. Just keep reading more fiction. Find a third place, whether it's a birdwatching club, whether it's a sumo wrestling club, a group of people that you can play D&D with. Just find a place that you go to occasionally, hopefully on a weekly basis, where there's a chance of meeting and talking to new people. I don't want to be a mom here, but you really gotta put that phone down. Enjoy social media and enjoy online spaces wisely, and remember that they're not a substitute for real communities. So in conclusion, when we look around us and feel sad about the state of the world and what other people are going through, this is still a relatively good sign. It means that we still have empathy and that we haven't stopped caring. Therefore, change is still possible. But whether we like it or not, we have to come together and have discussions about what parts of our current systems are hurting everyone involved. Humans are adaptable, and we are in no way required to uphold outdated systems that only serve the needs of only only a very small fraction of the population. Maybe I am too optimistic or naive, but I do believe in my heart that if we manage to overcome our prejudices and be able to unite no matter our nations, our religions, our sex, our race, and gender, then we actually have a chance to change the future for the better. Thank you for watching until the end of this video. If you haven't checked out the part 1 to this video, I highly recommend you watch that as well for continuity purposes. It was as usual lovely to have you here, and I'll see you next time.